Summer is generally a time for switching off, a gentle, non-pressurized time of holidays and rest, although in truth it has been difficult to turn away from the brusque headlines of the war in Ukraine, human beings in small boats, and last week's outcome of the nurse Lucy Letby's trial, in which she was found guilty of murdering 7 babies and attempted murder of 6 other babies. These international and national traumas intrude into our headspace and seem to demand some kind of rational response from us, as though there is a rational response for these and other events that are taking place around us. But as I mentioned last week, this month of Elul is a time to turn our thoughts elsewhere and reflect on the year that is coming to an end and prepare for our great festivals of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. These are our Jewish marathons, and like all marathons, it isn't possible simply to turn up at the starting line and hope that we're spiritually fit enough with the stamina and resilience to make it through, not only until Simchat Torah 3 weeks later, but beyond into the beginning of the Jewish year, armed with new resolutions and aspirations. So how do we Jews gear up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What is our exercise regime that allows us to address the rigors of repentance, judgment, forgiveness, prayer, fasting, and all the other hurdles that we are required to navigate at this season? One custom dating back to the year 1745 and introduced by the German scholar and polemicist Rabbi Jacob Emden is the reading of Psalm 27 between the 1st of Elul and Rosh Hashanah. Adonai ori v'yish'i, mimi ira, the Eternal One, is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? In some ways, this psalm is a curious choice. We can think of other psalms which have stronger penitential themes and in which the poet confesses their iniquities and shortcomings, asking God for mercy, offering thanksgiving and gratitude for forgiveness. Yet here, in a psalm that is chosen to be read during these days of mercy and forgiveness, there is no mention of repentance, no confession of sins, no plea for compassion or forgiveness. Instead, we hear the voice of the poet affirming his faith in God's capacity to rescue him from his enemies. I have no reason to be afraid, he says, even if those bent on evil draw near to slander me. They will stumble and fall. Even if an army encamp against me and a war be waged against me, my heart will not fear. My trust will still be firm. There is an extraordinary confidence in the poet. Nothing threatens him, neither insult nor defamation, nor physical intimidation. There is only one thing that I wish for, he says, and that is to dwell in the house of the Eternal One all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of God and seek God in the sanctuary. I will not be drawn into the ugly politics of the day, he implies. I will draw inspiration only from what is beautiful, good, and true. And so, he offers up sacrifices of thanksgiving. He finds comfort in the words of prayer and joy in the sound of music. And when, because of a sense of isolation and loneliness, his heart weakens and he becomes disheartened, he turns to God like a child, saying, "You will care for me still. Teach me your ways. Lead me in straight paths." It is only in the closing verses of the psalm that he hesitates. A shadow passes over him. He reveals in a brief moment his vulnerability and doubts. Lule ha'emanti lirot betuv Adonai be'eretz chayim. The translation on this slide, which comes from our Mahzor right at the very beginning, the Mahzor for the High Holy Days, ignores the first word of the verse, which I've put a big green arrow pointing at, and translates the verse, "You have caused me to believe that I shall see the goodness of the Eternal One." But that is to misunderstand the meaning of the first word, lule, which means if only or would that. It's an expression of uncertainty, ambiguity. If only I could believe that I will look upon the goodness of the Eternal One in the land of the living, would be a more accurate translation. If only, as though such an expression is, such a hope is impossible to realize. What an extraordinary confession of uncertainty and misgiving is suddenly introduced into a poem of faith and trust. If only I could believe, he says. In manuscripts and printed editions of this psalm, dots appear over the first word of this verse, as you can see here. If only, lule. These dots, says the Talmud, point to humanity's weakness of faith, noting that David, King David, traditionally thought to be the author of the Psalms, is suddenly consumed with doubt and uncertainty about his piety, as though asking, "Do I deserve a place in the land of the living?" In these questions, we discern the doubts and uncertainties, not only of the poet, but the rabbis themselves. If only we could believe. I wonder, is this not the refrain of our own age, when tentative expressions of doubt and rank atheism sit opposite the sure-fire confidence of believers and fundamentalists? What room is there for a gentle, searching faith, for the dynamic of a faith that is able to question the justice of God in an often deeply unjust world, and yet at the same time yearns for faith in a creator God, author of all that is good and beautiful in the world? If only I could believe. Even in our own prayer book, Siddur Lev Chadash, we are counseled not to dismiss doubts or suppress them, but to face them and wrestle with them. Helen Keller, the remarkable author and political activist, who was left both deaf and blind after contracting an illness as a small child, wrote of the healthy nature of human doubt. She said, "It need not discourage us if we are full of doubts. Healthy questions keep faith dynamic. In fact, unless we start with doubts, we cannot have a deep-rooted faith. One who believes lightly and unthinkingly has not much of a belief. Those who have a faith which is not to be shaken have won it through blood and tears, have worked their way from doubt to truth as one who reaches a clearing through a thicket of brambles and thorns. To doubt, to feel at times discouraged, to articulate those words, lulei ha'emanti, if only I could believe, does not mean that we are less Jewish, that we need to feel alienated from our Jewish heritage or from the Jewish community. On the contrary, it puts us at the heart of an enduring Jewish struggle, like Jacob wrestling with the mysterious being at the ford of Jabbok, or Rachel and Leah facing their own rivalry and struggle with God to give one a child and the other the affection of her husband. The end of the matter, all having been heard, as Ecclesiastes puts it, is not some rose-tinted faith of certainty, but how we choose to live, how we discern meaning and purpose in our lives, and what we are prepared to do for the cause of justice and truth. It is this that matters more than anything else, and this that will give us the hope and optimism to move forward through this month of Elul towards the new year.